That's good. And can you hear anything, Barbara?
No, I can hear, it sounds like somebody's rustling around, but maybe you and me.
Hey, everyone.
Good morning, Brian. I'm just doing a sound check. Is this? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. Brian, could you tell at that pedestrian advisory committee, how many people were there? On my screen, it looked like there were 5 people or so, and I thought, oh, there must be more.
Oh yeah, there were a lot more than that. I think
Okay.
it's sometimes it always shows the people whose cameras are on, maybe. And I think that might make it look like there's fewer people there. Yeah.
Okay.
So Brian,
Yes.
the next time you send out a date thing for the appeals board, will you ask people to reply all? Because I didn't, I had to ask you,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
yeah, because I didn't get all the replies.
Yeah. I think I'll do like a doodle poller next time because we're having trouble finding a date that works for everyone. So I think we'll try that.
Okay.
Is there an appeal today?
No, there is not. This is a training for Bruce and Adrian.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, unless you want to stay on appeals.
My hands are tied. Sorry.
Mine too.
Mhm.
There's the star of public radio there.
Vivek.
Oh,
Yeah, Vivek. Do you have your mic on, Vivek?
I think I do. Can you hear me?
I can now. Yeah, you sound a little far away.
Oh, okay. I think this might be better.
It is better. That interview you did on Think Out Loud was absolutely incredibly good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That was last minute. They called me like the day before, and it just turned out I was going to take my dog on a walk that afternoon, and I switched that. Dogs weren't happy, but I guess I'm glad you were.
I listened to it twice and recommended it. I called I think Jen, you know, Kathy Sheehan. Well, I think you do too, Vivek. I called Kathy and I said, you've got to listen to this. And I mean, I called a couple other people. I thought it was fabulous. You did a great job.
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's the conversation's happening. It's kind of great to be having folks with big megaphones like Think Out Loud, like echoing some of the sentiments that a lot of us have been talking about for decades, right? So it's just like it's a little bit more public now, I feel like, than just in our small groups. So that's really fun.
Yeah, I think the thing is that it has to stay public in order for something to happen. If it falls back under the radar screen, I don't think, you know, it'll go anywhere.
Yeah.
If I could add, Vivek, because of all that publicity and the Think Out Loud piece and some other things that you've done and the high heat and the impacts of that, the phone's kind of been ringing off the hook from all sectors about what can we do? What are you doing? It's been great. Like even things like a city capital improvement project, folks are reaching out to say, how can we do more with trees on this? So thank you.
Yeah, glad somebody's listening. That's kind of what it comes down to. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I appreciate all of your feedback on this publicity stuff, but we have more important work to do. And that is we get started with I'm going to call the meeting to order here. Get started on our Urban Forestry Commission meeting for August 2021. We're about a month out from official end of summer, and we're seeing at least a lot of impacts in the region around with the heat, with some cool weather. I think is bringing some respite to a lot of the green leafy brethren that we have in the region. Wanted to go ahead and just open up for public comments. I usually see a panelist and audience tabs on the Zoom, and I think that has changed for this meeting. But I do want to just open it up to public comments if there are any that we know of that are signed up, or those who want to have a public comment now, that would be great.
Yep, I see one. Yasha, I'm gonna unmute you here. Okay, you should be good to go.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Yasha.
Great. Hi, everyone. Greetings, Dr. Shandas and Urban Forestry Commissioners. Thank you for sharing your meeting time with me today. As you may know, Friends of Trees recently sent a letter to this group and would like to highlight a few elements at this time. At the last UFC meeting, the urban forester stated that there have been issues with our tree quality and that our focus was on quantity. We respectfully disagree. Our first-year survival rate is 97%, and our 12-year monitoring efforts show a survival rate of over 76%. We recognize that tree quality issues do arise, and we do have protocols in place to address it when it occurs. We also have long-standing relationships with many reputable nurseries in the area, and they value our feedback and will often offer free replacement trees when issues arise. So our goal is to offer both quality and quantity in addition to a community fostering event. Our goal is to plant street trees that thrive and provide long-term community benefits. If there are issues with our tree stock, we are always open to receiving feedback on our planting programs, and we would like to have open conversations instead of hearing of this information in a public meeting, of which we have rarely been invited. Secondly, it is our understanding that Urban Forestry wants to be the sole street tree planting program in the city of Portland this year. This impacts FOT and our community partners, as our funding partner, the Bureau of Environmental Services, is limited to planting on private property. While private property trees provide a host of benefits, we have significant concerns with this change. This limits both the programming options and geographic availability for no and low cost street trees planting options during a time when it seems increased tree planting is vital for our climate and health, and using every tool we have to encourage people to plant is important. Additionally, the community component of our work and the benefits and long-term stewardship it provides will be limited to only those planting yard trees. This step also causes concern for the long-term health of the urban forest. We spend a lot of time providing insight on why specific trees and locations are approved by the city for street trees. Our goal is always right tree, right place. Our fear is that without a street tree planting program in much of the city, people will select trees and locations without a permit that will negatively impact the long-term health of the tree, utilities, and ultimately cost residents and the city more in sidewalk and infrastructure repairs. Lastly, we are here to request a facilitated conversation alongside our partners with Urban Forestry about street tree planting moving forward in the city of Portland. Partners who have expressed interest in this conversation include Blueprint Foundation, Wisdom of the Elders, and Portland Opportunities Industrialization Center. In the Growing a More Equitable Urban Forest strategy you develop, you engage with community members to identify barriers, opportunities, and recommendations for growing a more equitable urban forest. Friends of Trees and our partners are here to continue that conversation because we feel there's more work to be done. We have and will continue to put equitable access to trees and community-based urban forestry first as we move our programming forward. As our concerns and challenges continue, we feel this is a necessary next step for community tree planting programming in Portland. And my personal message is this. As a person of color and a former refugee concerned about mitigating the climate refugees of today and tomorrow, now is not the time for city bureaus to play territorial games by monopolizing street trees to one entity. We should all be planting street trees as well as private property for the benefit of the community. All of us without limitations or territorial disputes. It is no secret, I repeat, no secret that BES would prefer to continue with their street tree program, but urban forestry has presented a barrier, and I'm saddened that limitations on street tree planting have been put in place to limit them and friends of trees to private property. The houseless deserve public property trees for shade during heat waves of the coming years and decades. East Portlanders, elders and youth alike, deserve to walk down their sidewalks in shade. This is unacceptable, and as the son of a revolutionary, I was brought up to call out injustice. Forcing BES out of the public right-of-way that provides benefits to so many Portlanders is the perpetuation of inequity and climate injustice. All of us need to be all in on street trees right now. I look forward to further conversation with all parties on this matter so we can build toward a comprehensive strategy to mitigate climate deaths in Portland. Thank you.
Thank you, Yashar. Commissioners, any responses? Okay, can I have commissioners speak first? Jen, is that okay?
Actually, I think it would be better if I say something now to frame this for future. And that is, thanks for your comments again, Yashar. And there have been, commissioners, a few letters back and forth, and those will be coming to you. The most recent one that we received was just very recently. But Parks and Recreation has communicated challenges and requirements to Friends of Trees in the past and will in the future, as is appropriate for our forest management responsibilities. And as has been the case for many years, community tree planting, education, and stewardship programs and events are fundamental to urban forestry in the city, including to Parks and Rec. We continuously work to expand and improve those. And right now the information between Yashar and Parks, that's being worked on, and we'll be reaching out to Yashar directly about that and Friends of Trees. It is an issue between the city and a city contractor. I think that's important to remember as well. And instead of we could spend a lot of time on this. So that's, Vivek, why I wanted to frame it now, is that this is a conversation that's happening, and we'll be back with more information in the future.
Hey, Megan. See your hand.
Well, Jen answered one of my questions. I was just saying I hadn't seen any letters, so that is helpful context there. One thing I would just add, though, although I understand the comment about it being a conversation between city bureaus and a contractor, I also think lots of those issues come up and we talk about them here. And I feel like I hate when I sound like a broken record, so I do apologize, but I have wanted and requested that we have BES to come and talk about this, and Friends of Trees to come up and talk about this as a commission, because it is a larger issue about community tree planting. And I feel like we just get told that it's going to come up and it's going to come up and it's going to come up, and then it doesn't come up. It has never happened in my time on this commission. And that they have, not once, Jen, it has not happened. And I have requested it multiple times. I've reviewed the notes where I've requested it. So I think sometimes I feel like, how does that conversation come up? I don't quite understand what that, I don't know what I'm not doing right to get this on the agenda. So I just want to continue to bring that forward so that we can have this conversation, because I think that there are many important points that Yashar brought up that I won't belabor now, but I would like to be able to have that forward. And I don't want to lose the point about, I don't think I can do anything in this realm, but his point to a facilitated conversation, just that I think was a specific request that was asked that probably we can't do, but I'll just bump that.
Great, thank you, Megan. Appreciate you echoing sentiments. Damon.
I'd also like to echo sentiments about what some of the, and highlight some of the things that Yashar said. We need to be cooperating and getting as many trees in the ground as possible. I do have to preface this with my typical, I'm a contractor for both urban forestry and BES planting trees. And so this is, conflict of interest, etc. Anyways, there needs to be conversation. There needs to be cooperation. BES is and has had a long-standing program that's been very successful at getting trees in the ground in large numbers and in good quality. And we need those trees in all the different spots we can put them. And we need to have people planting trees in as many different places as possible. So BES has a pretty stable funding source for planting trees. And I know urban forestry is trying to get that that funding source for their programs going as well. But we need to be approaching this from multiple directions.
Thank you, Damon. Last comment. We're out of time here, but Greg, quick, can you make this real quick? Oh, you're muted. Hey, Greg, you're muted. Oh,
Yeah,
there-
I'm sorry. I'm talking on a phone, which just makes everything really hard because
Yeah.
that's not what I normally do. Yeah, I want to speak in support of Friends of Trees. You know, I've planted with both parks and Friends of Trees, but Friends of Trees is just so that I'd say their community engagement is just really superior. So there's trees in the ground, and then there's also people that care about trees and people that prune trees. So I don't know all the ins and outs of how these relationships have gone astray, but I think the facilitation might be a key to get them back into a better, smoother groove. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Noted. Danielle, can we hold off a little bit, or can we move?
Yeah, this isn't a comment about what we've been talking about so much as I think I talked to you before. I had something I wanted to tell everyone about just to let them know. So in a way, this kind of relates in that I think in the next year or two, the amount of funding and emphasis on street trees in particular is about to go through the roof. I'm part of a task force with the mayor's office and the mayor about the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. And it's money that's coming from some of the big federal huge packages, infrastructure packages. And the city has already defined how they're going to spend the money for the first of the 2 years. And at the meeting, I was kind of shocked that there was all this discussion about climate change mitigation, and there wasn't one discussion about trees at all. And so I kind of said, well, trees are really critical infrastructure, and to mitigate the heat island effects we're talking about, we really should be thinking about getting a lot more trees in the ground. And Mayor Wheeler was really interested in this idea, so is his staff. And so I had a follow-up meeting just with a couple members of his staff and a member of Commissioner Rubio's staff, and we talked about this. And what they're going to do is, because they're right now getting set for putting in this year's funding, they're holding off on starting to talk about next year's funding. But they did say that they really wanted to get funding for street trees into next year's funding coming from ARPA. So I thought it would be a really interesting thing for us to talk about how we might want to advocate for what the city might be able to do with some of the federal money for planting trees in the ground, because this could be a really big expansion of trees. And I think all the commissioner staffs understand this whole issue of, well, it's going to take decades for the really for the impacts to make themselves known in terms of large trees. The other thing is I'm also following statewide effort. Governor Brown's 2020, that they started something with trying to impact climate change. And now there's something in the current draft of the act they're working on about urban street trees in particular. So there could be some more additional state funding coming through in the next few years. So I think, the conversation we just had, and I don't want to get into that, but I think there's going to be plenty of work and funding for all the bureaus. And I hope that this is a discussion that at this body, the Urban Forestry Commission, that we can at least have some discussions at the meeting about how we might want to advocate getting trees in the ground and what to do with the funding. So I'll just leave it at that. But I thought everyone should know about these two potential new funding sources that are coming down. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm gonna I'm gonna request that we skip over the meetings minutes for this last, just for this last month and the meeting minutes that we're gonna approve. And I'd like to just move directly to the Forester's report, so that we don't short shrift that conversation as well. So I know we have a lot more stuff on the agenda today. So just to kind of kick the can down the road for the meeting minutes to next time. Sorry if some of those who reviewed minutes, we can look at those, keep your notes and we'll review those next time. So turn it over to Jen for the Forester's report.
Thanks, Vivek, and I've got my stopwatch running, so hopefully I stay within bounds. I had to switch this up a little bit. Daniel, thanks for your comment and your discussions with the mayor's office and City Hall. Parks is also involved in those discussions and engaged around ARPA and other funding opportunities that, as we were saying at the beginning of the meeting, information like Vivek's and the media coverage that he's gotten, and just the situation with the climate crisis and the impacts of that, the dramatic inequity in trees, the urban heat island effects and what we can do about those, as well as trying to make more space for trees in those areas, are getting a lot more attention. And ARPA is one of the ways that we see that happening. So thanks for bringing it up, and we're working on that as well. And we think there will be opportunities around that. The ARPA funding is focused on COVID related impacts. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And then other things. I have nothing new at this point to report on Streets 2035 or the street tree maintenance policy work. I can report a little bit on a couple other things. City tree planting coordination, including with BES, continues. We've established a regular communication pattern. We're still learning about the new BES staff and what the plans are in the short term and the long term, and working with them on those plans so that they fit within the city's overall goals, including the urban forest management plan. And a common goal we have is for the city to speak as one voice. And that's something that we have heard from past stakeholder engagement processes. And instead of it being different messages and competing messages or confusing messages from BES and from Parks. So I think that's a great advance. And as you'll recall, this is something that we'll be bringing back to the commission when we know more and can share what the plan is going forward. And Megan, that's in response to your request, which we have heard about BES coming to present. We're working with BES so that we can bring that information forward. And I like that approach is going well, and I'm really pleased with it. It seems appropriate. Another item that I've been reporting on regularly that I do have news on is the Bureau of Transportation-led pedestrian design guide update is planned for next month's Urban Forestry Commission agenda. Ding, ding. So this is about Portland's future sidewalk and pedestrian zone standards and designs, which are very important for street trees. It's also connected to the Streets 2035 project. And Park's goal in the project has been to elevate trees as essential right-of-way infrastructure and provide more space for street trees. So again, talking about what Vivek's been doing and the media is paying attention to in his research, and also what we all know about urban heat island effect and Park's role in trying to improve the policies around that. So there are more opportunities for trees. This is a really important project. I wanted to remind folks too that Damon is your representative to that project's technical advisory committee. So we'll hear more about that next month, and that is exciting. Also, appeals board training. I came in when folks were talking already. Maybe you already covered this, but thank you to Bruce and Adrian and the appeals board chair, Barbara, for completing the training for that. So they're ready to go when another appeal comes up, which we don't have today. Moving on to another item. Adrian also has completed the Equity 101 training. That's the kind of baseline equity, inclusion, and diversity training that the city offers to all staff, and now also all advisory groups. And Leah is scheduled to do so in September. So thank you both for participating in that. And that'll be really helpful for today's agenda, which includes information about Park's racial equity lens. So we'll look forward to that conversation. Also some information in case you hear about this that's relevant to the regulatory components of forest management. Commissioner Ryan's office, Commissioner Ryan is the commissioner for the Bureau of Development Services, among other things, has started an initiative with Bureau of Development Services to speed up private property permitting, development permitting. Of course, as you hopefully will remember, urban forestry is very involved in that as one of the regulators and the primary implementer of the tree code in the city. So we have allocated staff time to that project. There is no role for the Forestry Commission in that project. It is a project between bureaus, but I just wanted you to be aware of it. There's also members of the development community who are involved in other aspects of the project that are already complete. So that's that item. Moving on to another one. I wanted to give you an update on the tree code amendment project that's currently underway. You may recall that this current project is for simple clarifying amendments, and the urban forestry team is leading that, specifically Brian and Nick Desai. And we expect to have an initial set of proposed amendments determined in the next few weeks, and we'll be publishing those and making them available to you all. And it will be an agenda item in the next few meetings. And our goal was to have these completed in the next calendar year. And just as a reminder, these are those simple, clarifying, not really potentially controversial amendments that would require more research and work. These are pretty straightforward. Another item, some news that's very likely related to the climate crisis. Some trees that were planted several years ago by volunteers in urban forestry at Lent School and on adjacent ODOT right-of-way, Department of Transportation right-of-way, were burned in a fire, a grass fire and then a tree fire. So that's sad news, but we're seeing that type of threat increasing overall, and we're seeing some impacts on that. And I wanted to make you aware that Parks is working with ODF and Portland Fire to try to reduce the risks of wildfire in natural areas, especially. And a lot of that has to do with trying to manage use of those properties. One of the bigger potential fire sources that's perceived is camping. And so folks are really trying to look at shifting camping out of the most sensitive areas, especially when it's been really dry weather. Another climate crisis related bit of news. As some of you will recall, we have an elm monitoring program for Dutch elm disease impacts on the city's elm population, elm tree population. And we're about at the halfway mark of the season, or we were last month when I checked in on this. And at this point, we have had 50, give or take, elm trees succumb to DED and have to be removed. And these are tested. We send in samples to make sure that they are indeed infected and need to be removed. And for a comparison's sake, in all previous years, at the end of the season, we usually end up with 40 or 45 trees that have had to be removed. So at this point, we're on pace to see roughly double the loss that we normally would see. And we think that that is, at least in great part, due to heat, stress, and drought. And we are planning on, we haven't had an elm monitoring update in a while, so we are planning on bringing that back for you all to look at that policy. Okay, almost there. This is the last one I have. So hopefully you'll recall that staff have been looking into compensation for volunteer advisors to the city, like the urban forestry commissioners, like you folks. And the purpose of this would be to help remove barriers for more representative and diverse participation in advisory bodies, which historically are comprised of white privileged folks who have more access and have had more access historically. So I'm happy to share that Director Long has determined that remuneration will be offered to the 2 Urban Forestry Commission members who are going to participate on behalf of the commission in the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland teams. And this will be part of a Parks pilot program. There are quite a few considerations around the different types of advisory roles, the extent of advisor groups and projects in the Bureau. And there's also legal considerations around paying folks and when they become staff and tax and insurance implications. So those things are still being explored. We expect that some details on the pilot program will be developed and be shared as early as the first half of September. But that's good news there. I would say that for these two folks who we're going to talk about today, who will represent the commission, Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland, some payment will be available for that. And that is the end of my report in almost 10 minutes.
All right, thanks, Jen.
Welcome.
All right, I see Barbara, I see Megan, I see Bruce, Megan, and I see Damon. Maybe in that order: Barbara, Megan, Bruce, and Damon.
Just quickly, the appeals board training has not occurred. We are still looking for a date that we can all gather together on Zoom.
Sorry about that, Barbara. I'd understood from others that it had happened.
No, but thanks.
We haven't forgotten you at least. And I'm glad there's not an appeal this month.
Yay.
All right.
That's it.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. Megan?
Jen, thanks for the Elm data. Really interesting. I realize this question, you all may not have been able to crunch it, but I'm curious if there's the ability to see any correlation amongst the request for removal of dead, dying, dangerous trees, kind of in correlation to either the ice storm event or the recent heat event. And if we're just seeing year-to-year comparison, I imagine that might be hard to do at this point, but I'm curious if that's happened.
Yeah. We track each year and it's available online, and maybe that's something we need to bring up more officially with you folks. Our permit volumes, number of trees removed, those numbers of permits issued, those sorts of things. It's called the Urban Forest Action Plan Implementation Report. So that does some of it. I will have to, let's get back to this, because I'll have to look at the data we have are not always as exhaustive as we might like. We're kind of beholden to the software systems that the city has in place. But I'll look into that, Megan, and we'll see what more we can say. In the meantime, we'll share a link with you all to those annual reports so you can look at those. And I will just say that this winter storm season, we're still responding to that. We're still seeing, it's interesting, especially with street trees, not so much park trees, that, trees that originally maybe weren't the best form structure. In later years, when they're in their 20s, 30s, these are the ones that more often than not cause the hazards and the failures in storms. And that's one of the things we're always paying attention to with street tree and other planting, making sure that the form is conducive to the future life of the tree, not just that it survives, but that it doesn't become an emergency later on.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Going to Bruce.
Two questions on the Elm information. It was 5-0, you said, not 1-5. Okay, thank you. And the second one, currently, are there any street elms that are treated for Dutch elm disease by urban forestry, or has that been discontinued?
I don't know, Bruce. I would have to look. So before I say something incorrect, let's get back to you. Maybe that can be part of the report we're planning on doing.
Okay, and as follow-up, I'm sorry. South Park blocks, some of the citizens there were talking about, the trees should be treated. And I was doing a quick, in my head, sort of how much would that cost per year? And I'm way out of touch on that, but I'm guessing it's somewhere around 200,000 or more a year just to treat the trees. And they never talked numbers, but I think they were missing some information there.
Yeah, again, things that we will cover in the update we give you all on the Dutch elm disease management program. Sorry, truck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Damon.
I actually have one more thing to say, if I may. It's closer to $400,000 or $500,000. And so you all know, there was quite a bit of misinformation going around about the South Park Blocks master plan. those elm trees are routinely inoculated against Dutch elm disease and have been for many years. So just know that. Thanks, Vivek.
Mhm. Damon.
So Jen, in the part about the BDS conversations with speeding up processing of development permits, you mentioned that the development community was part of this conversation, but it was not a place for Urban Forestry Commission. Or is there anybody else representing? I'd hate for it to be, one side versus another, but the other side of the coin, as it were, is usually how that plays out. Development tends to be a little bit hard on trees. So is there anybody representing, besides Urban Forestry, any other non-governmental organizations or voices representing trees?
So good question, Damon. It's an opportunity for me to clarify what I said, I guess, because it sounds like it wasn't quite clear. The project isn't about the policies. The project is about the process.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how long it takes to get a permit, what might be efficiencies that BDS and the partner bureaus like us and BES and Bureau of Transportation and Water Bureau, who are always involved in those permitting processes, could do. So there's not a tree advocacy role in it. It's really about the process. And that's why some members of the local property development community were involved, because they're basically the customers and have that experience of the process, not the policy. The policy would be things like Title 11 amendments or other city code amendments, which you are all engaged in. And that's a good opportunity too for me to do a little refresh with you all about the commission's role. So the Forestry Commission is advisory to parks, to the urban forestry program. And that advice is intended to be constructive, supportive, and help all of us move the ball forward together. And it is on policies and certain projects like Streets 2035, like policy type projects, specifically on those things. So just keep that in mind when because there are 1,000,001 things that we could and might want to talk about at commission meetings. And I appreciate that because to me, it means that you are all tree lovers and you're very interested. Given the time that we have to do the work and our deference to your volunteer services that we don't want to overtax, and also that there are roles that are really urban forestries to do, like working with BES or Bureau of Transportation or what have you on the day-to-day and operational things that are not about policies. So I just wanted to clarify that, and it's been a while since we've had that said, I think.
Sure.
But Damon, does that help with the BDS project? It's different than whether trees are protected or not.
No, it does. I see in my own consulting business and consulting experience working with this process that a lot of times the developer doesn't realize they have trees on their property till much later in the process, and that they have to actually preserve some, or they should be preserving some of these trees. So they go and they do all this design work with the idea that trees aren't going to be on, that there's no trees on the property, and except for the ones that they're going to put back. So there's so often, so many times we are in the situation of just writing obituaries for trees during the development process. And I think that if it was made strong or made aware to the developers earlier in the game, prior to development, that, or prior to permit, or at the very first stages, hopefully there's some way of making existing trees a little bit more a focal part of the development process. And that's just my hope. And as in terms of urban forestry actually being the voice at the table, I don't need urban forestry to be the voice at the table. There's a lot of other groups that are pro trees. Looking at you, Bruce. that are able to come to the table and, represent. So I feel like if the development community is there, the tree preservation, the tree focused folks should be there as well.
Thanks, Damon. I think we need to keep moving. This is a point. Yeah, it's a point that's going to keep coming back up. I have a sense, and there's really no resolution I'm going to see on this right now, but I do see an important kind of friction that you brought up, Damon, that's coming up that we'll want to talk about as a commission. I want to just keep moving. Barbara, I see your hand. Unless it's really quick, we need to move into, we have some guests here as well. Maybe really quick, we need to move into heritage tree, but Barbara, quick comment.
Yeah, a few years ago, we talked about getting trees into the planning document so that when people go to the planning department and look at documents, or so that they come up in a title search like rights of way. And we haven't done anything about that. I'm not sure that, I know how to approach that with the city of Portland, but, the code actually doesn't say that we advise just on certain projects. And I think our role is to try and move urban forestry forward. And I think there are a lot of things that we could do. We always run out of time.
Yeah. I agree. It's a kind of a pack thing. I've actually just requested a little more time for public comments as well, since we've consistently ran over that. And if we don't use it, we can kind of use it on other topics. I'd like to move into heritage tree removal. It's a quick comment before we go into the racial equity lens overview, where we have a couple of guests joining us today. Maybe a quick touch on the heritage tree number 76 removal and delisting. I think that's a vote that we're going to be calling on that.
Yeah, just a quick reminder, and again, because we have staff here to give a presentation and we're behind, this is just the vote. The presentation, PowerPoint, and everything was at the last meeting.
Yep.
So we can just vote on this quickly to get back on schedule. That would be great.
Actually, Brian, I have a slight revision on that. We actually do have to ask if there are public comments. The commission cannot vote without having a public hearing. The tree has been posted, and I actually personally am uneasy the fact that we're not presenting before we actually have any public comments. But did you get anyone that indicated they were going to comment?
I haven't received any requests for public comment on this.
Okay, well, in that case, I guess I'm willing to not. I had planned to just do like the 1 or 2 slides that show the input. Tony, do you have any issues with us not going through the presentation, having it been last month and then voting this month?
I don't, as long as the rest of the commission is fine with it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, essentially, we need a motion to delist and remove heritage tree 76, the native dogwood, and then we would need a second and a vote with at least 6 commissioners in support. Barbara, I guess you got a commissioner comment.
No, I have a motion to make. I make a motion that we vote to remove from heritage trees tree 76 and delist. I know that it has to go farther than the commission, but I would make a vote that we proceed toward removal of that tree.
Second.
Great. So Vivek, I think you can call for
Yep.
votes.
I can call a vote here. All in favor of delisting removal of heritage tree number 76 as the motion presented. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hands, all unanimous. Thank you all. That means there's no no's and no abstentions, at least for this. So go ahead and so moved. Thank you, commissioners, for that. Given the guests that we have, I'd like to come back to the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland teams. I know there is an update on that. We want to bring that up. Brian, or can I jump right to the racial equity lens discussion?
Yeah, sure thing.
Okay, thanks. So I want to turn it over. It sounds like it's Carolyn Lee and Kathy Dang from Portland Parks and Rec Equity Inclusion Team that are here joining us to talk a little bit about the racial equity lens that Parks is moving forward and has developed. So I'd like to turn it over to you, Carolyn and Kathy, if you want to introduce yourself, and if you do have any, as we like to ask, if you do have any specific feedback that you're looking for from commissioners, please let us know at the beginning, and if you're okay with clarifications during your presentation as well.
Thank you very much. And it's really nice to meet you all. I'm Carolyn Lee, and my pronouns are she, they. And my tenure with Parks and Recreation began when I was 5 years old. I took ballet through the Charles Rice School, and little did I know I would be working in Parks and Recreation as an adult. So I have a long history. And what we'd like to do is really, as briefly as possible, go around and everyone introduce themselves and say how long you've actually been serving on the commission. Kathy, would you go first? Kathy Dang?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting us. My name is Kathy Dang, and I work with Carolyn on the Equity and Inclusion team at Parks. Pronouns are she, her. And yeah, it's exciting to be here and just learn about your role and your work and share some of the work we've been doing on this racial equity lens with you all. And I started at Parks almost 10 years ago, and I recognize some names and faces here in community gardens. So I have dabbled in the fruit tree permitting world with urban forestry staff and Jen growing fruit trees to feed our community. So it's nice to kind of circle back to that.
All right, let's try to make this real quick. I'll go Vivek Shandas, he, him, his, and been on the commission since I think for 6 years now. I'll go to Barbara.
Barbara Holmbeck, I've been on the commission for 7.5 years. So I will be terming out in March, and I managed the urban community forestry for the forestry program for the U.S. Forest Service prior for 20-something years, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska.
Great. You want to pick somebody, Barbara?
Damon.
Damon Schrosk, he, him, and I have been on the Urban Forestry Commission nearly 6 years, and yeah, and I'm a private contractor, arboricultural contractor and consultant.
Want to pick somebody, Damon? Just popcorn around.
The only people on my screen. Let's talk to Bruce.
Bruce Nelson. This is my, I think, going on 3rd year. Yeah, on the Urban Forestry Commission.
Hi,
Who's
Bruce.
next?
Hi, Kathy.
Who's next? Bruce.
Greg.
Greg Everhart, she, her. I worked at Parks for 15 years. That was quite a while ago. I've been on the commission 1 year short of 2 full terms because I replaced someone, and I will also term out in March.
Hi, Greg.
All right. Who's next, Greg?
Lorena.
Lorena, she, her. I'm in the commission for 3.5 years. And yeah, working for doing grad school, studying urban forestry, working GIS. So I'll pass to Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Vandemark. I use she, her pronouns. I've been on the commission 3.5 years, and I work for Portland Audubon, co-managing the Backyard Habitat Program. And Jeanette.
I'm Anjanette. I'm Brown. I've been on the commission for 3.5 years. I'm also on the appeals committee, and I'm excited to hear about this presentation.
Hey, who's next, Anjanette? Let's see, we have Leah and Daniel, I think, left.
I'll go to Daniel.
Thanks, and Jeanette. Daniel Newberry, he, him. And let's see, I'm a few months short of 5 years on the commission, and in my day job, I'm the director of the Johnson Creek Watershed Council.
Right.
And Leah.
I'm Leah Black, and I just started, so I'm the newest commissioner here. So I think, what is this, my 4th meeting? She, her pronouns, and I work as a science educator for focusing on preschool through elementary school.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you all. And we know that you're going to be, you're sitting here for 2 hours, and we were hoping to be able to take a break, but since we're starting late, what I want you to do is just get up from your chair for just a couple seconds. Move your arms, move your shoulders, because we want you to be comfortable when we do this exercise, right? Just take a couple deep breaths. Bruce, you're sitting. Stand up, move your arms, move your arms. Okay, get that blood flowing and go back and sit down here. Thank you. I feel better. I hope you do too.
Carolyn, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So hello, everyone, and thanks for inviting us today to provide an overview of Parks and Recreation's racial equity lens. Let's start with our definition of racial equity to build some common understanding and frame our conversation today. All right. So, definition: when race does not determine or predict the distribution of resources, opportunities, and burdens for group members in society. And that comes from the City of Portland's Office of Equity and Human Rights, OEHR. So for a second, let's do a little bit of a reflection, okay? Take a moment on this definition and what it means to you and your work on the commission. Now, Leah, I know you're new. This is what you did. What did you say? Your fourth meeting, but think about that. Why is racial equity important? Please put it in the chat. We want to have maybe 1 or 2 comments, or you can come off mute and say it out loud. Anyone thoughts? What it means to you and your work with the commission? We want this to be interactive, but we don't want to force it. So I don't see anybody writing anything. So we will just move forward now.
I have a comment.
Oh, okay, please.
Racial equity, as far as it pertains to the commission, to me, means that I have an opportunity to bring a voice to my community that has been traditionally displaced in the city of Portland and the surrounding areas. And so I like to be able to tell my story.
Thank you so much for that.
Wonderful. We love the little ones. Daniel, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I think one thing we've talked about a lot over the years in this commission is how unevenly distributed street trees are throughout the city, and how that has major health detriments, benefits according to where it is, and how, especially when we look at Vivek's work on redlining, how the distribution is really very highly correlated with redline and where a higher proportion of underserved communities are located. So that's something I know we've talked about a lot, and everyone feels very strongly about trying to change that.
Super. Thank you, Daniel. Does anyone else have a hand up? No. Okay. Appreciate the participation, and we want to make this as interactive as we can, though we're going to be running through this, and I apologize since we got started late. So to provide some backgrounds, the racial equity lens was one of the most substantial items that actually never took place in the Bureau's 5-year racial equity plan, which is actually sunsetting in 2021. It was part of actually goal 1 in the plan. And it's also a part of the citywide racial equity goals and strategies to implement a racial equity lens. Equity is not a one size fits all, and we had a lot of other things come up. So unfortunately, we did not get to it. So, but the need is still there, right? And as a consequence, a couple of years ago, our Bureau's Diversity and Equity Committee that we call DEC, the policy subcommittee expressed the need for this lens, the importance so that we could formalize a tool to truly guide us toward inclusion and offering a welcoming environment for staff and community alike, for everybody, really. And so when Kenya Williams, who's our equity manager, maybe some of you have met him, came on board last year, he really took this recommendation to heart, and just he and the equity team, that's Kathy and myself and Sam Sabeti, with the help of members from the DEC's policy subcommittee and another group called FEST with the Bureau, which stands for Fostering Equity Support Team, we really started to look to develop the racial equity lens. And a part of that work is we researched existing models. And if you've ever done a Google search of racial equity lens, there's a lot out there. And it really helped us shape where we are, what we're going to present to you today. And we had check-ins with a small working group, had work sessions and throughout the Bureau. And we're really grateful for the feedback that we received from folks and staff from actually Urban Forestry who are on the DEC. Nick Desai and Brandon Nam served in this capacity, and we really love that. And Jen did not serve in that capacity, but she does serve on our Diversity and Equity Committee. And she's also our chair of our budget subcommittee for the DEC. So we also developed a questionnaire that was sent out to staff that helped us with the development of the racial equity lens. We really wanted to make sure that this was a ground up effort. We didn't want this top down at all. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible through this process. And in the questionnaire that we offered in English and Spanish, we received about 200 responses, which we thought was great response from folks. And that really helped us to develop the strategy that we're going to show you now. So Kathy, can you take over?
Thank you so much. Thanks for your patience as I am kind of doing multiple things here. So coming up with a common understanding here before moving forward, what is a racial equity lens? So before we get into these questions, these reflections, and how to guide decision-making process, we really wanted to ground in what a racial equity lens is with this slide. So it's really a critical thinking approach to unlearning individual, institutional, and structural racism. It evaluates burdens and benefits and outcomes to underserved communities, such as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, people living with disabilities, people living with low income, immigrant and refugee communities, and unsheltered communities. So just a reflection, that's a lot there. What comes to mind just hearing from one or two people when you hear these three words, racial equity lens? You can put it in the chat or share with us verbally.
Or raise your hand and we can call on you.
And if nothing comes to mind, that's okay too. We can keep moving.
I can win.
Thanks,
Megan.
Megan.
Megan, please.
I'm having weird computer issues. I apologize.
It happens to us. It's all
no
right.
worries.
Yeah, no, I mean, what comes to mind for me, right, is I feel like that when you said lens at the end, that gave us something extra, right? It's a lens, hopefully that we can all wear, but to look at the world to ensure that there is racial equity, right? To the earlier comments that race isn't the determining factor at the end of the day.
Thank you, Megan. And I see that Anjanette put justice, inclusion, big change. Yes, changing. Damon put changing focus. Leah, the importance of impacted communities having leadership in this work, not more privileged folks doing for. Bruce, sounds like so many of Portland residents are not served historically. Lorena, acknowledge of multiple cultures using public green spaces that can have different behaviors. Vivek, lenses have different depths and strengths.
Great feedback and input and comments. Thank you so much for being so engaged with us. So exactly like the themes coming out of these ideas, it really introduces us to a set of questions into our decision-making process and helps us really focus on equity as a process, us working together to decide on things, but also as an outcome, the results that we want to see, the change that we want to see. So it's a helpful tool that was really designed as an internal process for our park staff, with our park staff, to create an intentional process for centering equity and considering voices that aren't at the table, voices that have been excluded, voices that have not been heard. And applying an equity lens to our work can help parks as a bureau really reflect on how all of our decisions may disproportionately burden underserved communities. And by centering the people most impacted, our BIPOC communities, people most impacted by systemic racism, everyone benefits, everyone is lifted. So moving on here. We really needed a racial equity lens at parks to develop a consistent bureau-wide approach to addressing inequities. There were sort of ad hoc different equity lenses and different ideas of an equity lens being utilized at parks, and with Kenya Williams as our leader and working with these listening sessions and groups and surveys, we took a stab at drafting the first round of a parks consistent tool. And we hope that these questions will guide a more inclusive perspective, a more collaborative approach when making decisions, and to really draw our attention to how all of our decisions have impacts and affect other people. So some tips for using a racial equity lens. Applying a racial equity lens as early as possible is important. We don't want to have this be an add-on or a check the box at the end, or after we've already created a policy or implemented a new project. Say, how do we apply an equity lens here? Beginning, starting early. Use it before decisions have been made so that this lens can really shape your process and shape your results and the outcomes that you want to see. A racial equity lens won't tell you what action to take, won't fix all of urban forestry's equity issues. I wish it would. It won't fix all of our parks inequities. The work still needs to be done in partnership with community, with staff, with each other, and along with a formal, ongoing anti-racism training, commitment, growth. It's really a tool to help you discuss and reflect and be more inclusive and welcoming in your work, and think of ways you can center people most impacted by your decisions, in your decisions. This is an ongoing iterative process. It's like planting a seed or planting a new tree. We can't control how it's going to grow, how healthy it's going to be, the different factors that might come in with, a dry drought year. So it's okay to always go back to this lens and revisit it throughout your decisions, or maybe bring in a question, even if you're midway through, and say, who was burdened by this? What are the unintended impacts here of this process? And just take a pause. There's a lot of power in that pause. So these steps are some guiding questions that Carolyn and I will go through with you. And before we dig into it, we did just want to make this tangible for you all. We've been working with Urban Forestry team. They've been very engaged in this process. And as the commission, we wanted to share some of that work. We did a workshop with Angie DeSalvo's science and outreach team a couple months ago. And we also shared this at all staff, an all staff employee gathering. So here are some tangible ways that Urban Forestry staff specifically have identified of how they want to apply the racial equity lens in their work. So just looking through, updating planting strategies, tree regulation guidance, measuring the impact of programs, reviewing job classifications, figuring out how to work with people who have not been traditionally served by the program. And also just simply listening more to understanding people's experience and using that information to move forward. And as we go through these steps, just continue staying engaged with us. We'll do our best to give you an overview and, you know, think about some additional questions that you may add to your work on the UFC. Maybe it's about budgeting levy dollars or how to integrate this into communication strategies. I know a lot of the work you do is around communicating your role and the decisions and the processes that you are a part of. So with that, I'll pass it back to Carolyn to move us through.
Thanks, Kathy. And I just want to recognize that we're just flying through this for you folks. And again, this is just an overview, but we really wanted just to give you a taste of what we're doing to move forward on the racial equity lens. So right now, what I would like for somebody to read the 7 steps, if you wouldn't mind, out loud. If somebody could do that.
I'll do it. Step
Thanks,
1,
Leah.
sure. Think about the desired result. Step 2, engage internal and external stakeholders. Step 3, gather data. Step 4, determine who benefits and or who is burdened. Step 5, diminish harm and develop opportunities. Step 6, evaluate and be accountable. Step 7, communicate.
Great. Thanks, newbie Leah. That's great. Appreciate it. So, and we want you to know that we're going to be sending you a link to this tool at the end so you can look at this and see how it makes it relevant for your work with UFC. As you listen, we encourage you to think about specific examples, projects, policies, and where the tool can be applied. And please do stay engaged as you can. And here's another important tip. I know we've been giving you a lot of tips today, but tell yourself this one again and again. It really doesn't matter if you start with step 1 or step 7, or you may have your own steps, depending on what the project or process is. It may, you may begin with 3, which is gathering data. Remind yourself of this tip throughout the process. It doesn't matter where you start. And there's no ending, actually. With equity, there is no end. This is a journey, not a destination. Keep that in mind. And again, we've talked about this earlier, that this is just a guide for urban forestry and Urban Forestry Commission, and really to make things more equitable and inclusive and have those outcomes and decisions and processes be more equitable. All right, so here we go. Step 1, think about that desired result. Really think about that. Think about that desired result. To support equitable outcomes early, be proactive by planning equity into your process. It really can't be an add-on at the end saying, oh, I forgot. I really need to ask those folks about whether this is something that they would be interested in. Have people be a part of the process from the beginning and really think about that desired result. Think about it early. Really utilize the voices and perspectives of people most impacted. As we said, Black, Indigenous people of color, immigrants and refugees and staff. Use these questions as your starting point. Again, think about the desired result. And even though you may change that desired result, that's okay. Because as we said, this is an iterative process that we continually are shaping and molding as we move through the racial equity lens process. Kathy?
So step 2 is engage internal and external stakeholders. So this is all about people and who we center in our work. It's really about the ongoing work of building trust, building that foundation of relationships, trust, and collaboration that can really lead to true, mutual partnerships with each other on committees such as this, but also with the community as well, depending on the work that you do and the impact that you're having in your decisions. So in order to have an inclusive process and equity in your results, we need to include people most impacted in our decisions. That's the key takeaway from this step and these questions. And you all know the work best in your role and how you can get the most impact on the decisions, right? The policies and the projects that you have tasked with this really heavy load on the Urban Forestry Commission. So it may be really external community facing, something that really is impacting a specific neighborhood or specific community group, or it may be really internal to the city, and these stakeholders are going to change depending on your scope of work. This is a great place to think about the kind of relationships and partnerships that we need to cultivate, the authentic engagement, the non-transactional relationships. We really want to build long-term, deep relationships and hold those relationships with, a lot of respect to center racial equity. I think a main takeaway here is to know you don't have to have it all figured out before going to your stakeholders. It's scary to do that, but people really respond to not being presented a whole plan, but actually being part of planning, part of the designing and forming and molding the process that will really be responsive to their needs and give you a more inclusive result. So we really need to partner, collaborate, and include people who are impacted by our decisions. And this is really about listening more to each other, listening more to community. So step 3 is about data, gathering data, and really being data driven is an overall, City of Portland racial equity strategy. And we can send that link in the chat at the end too. Why is this important? Because we need to measure, going back to that word change, we need to measure the success and the change of our programs and projects and policy. And we can't measure that without data. So this is really important in setting goals and measuring that change in progress and making sure that we're accountable. So this helps us to build understanding, make informed decisions and draw from a more holistic perspective than assuming we know what community needs. So data is more than just numbers. It's really complicated. And I think data is also just honoring people's lived experience. When we do community engagement, make sure that there's community representation in the decisions that are impacting them, like in the Urban Forestry Commission here. How are we engaging community leaders in our processes at parks? How are we authentically connecting with organizations or community leaders and really listening to their lived experience, listening to their input about how we can be more inclusive in our projects and policies. And this is also about disparities. So another reason why we really want to gather data is to have a clear picture of our strategy when it comes to disparities, because that's going to inform our decision process early. And just really quick, I know disparity, what is a disparity in Urban Forestry Commission that you've seen? So I've heard some earlier, but just if one or two people could share in the chat, or what's an example of a data disparity that you may have come across in urban forestry? Anyone have an example? Jen.
One was mentioned earlier in the meeting. I think Megan brought it up, and it was about, what are permit implications and effects? And hers was more about particular trees, but we can also look at that in terms of people. So who is using permits, who's not, who's impacted by permitting, how are they impacted by permitting? And those are things that we don't really have great tools to collect at this point.
Thank you for that, Jen. I see another data disparity in the chat. Thanks, Greg. Very few heritage trees east of I-205. Yes, thank you for that.
And Vivek said the extent to which community groups are actively engaged in the tree planting process and whether trust has been built with historically marginalized communities. That great point.
Yeah, I would add too, and it's with the data, right? Like even not just with where trees are being planted, right? But like reasoning what trees are available for people to plant, whether they're culturally relevant or not, and then whether people feel that they have the resources to maintain a tree. So not getting a tree just is, if you look at that from just a data perspective, is not necessarily representative of how people feel about trees.
Thank you, Megan. And Antoinette also put ability to show the increase of services due to an active equity plan. Yes, definitely. It's excellent. Thank you so much for all of your input. So let's move on to step 4. Determine who benefits and who is burdened. And I don't like to say this out. Well, actually, I do like to say this out loud. Learning from our past mistakes gives a clear picture of who we need to center and where to prioritize. Because I don't know about you, but when I make a mistake, and let's just face it, we're all human, those are our best lessons, right? And sometimes they can be brutal and painful, but we don't shy away from, we learn from them, and we can move forward if we choose to, and especially with the racial equity lens, determine who benefits and who is burdened. We want to correct wrongs. We want to center the people who have been most impacted and marginalized. Megan, you were talking about, yeah, you could give the more culturally relevant trees, right? Sometimes you don't think about that. Oh, any tree works. And then it's also about the care and feeding. That's also with your work, but also racial equity work. It's the care and feeding of the people and the plantings, all of it. It all just kind of dovetails nicely. And we just need to remember that. It sounds easy, but it isn't easy. We forget. We get caught up in our own worlds. And for example, some of our Black indigenous people of color or BIPOC communities and low-income families, they can't participate in our programs because cost is a barrier. So maybe what we can do is partner with companies that maybe can sponsor folks or sponsor events to help correct some of that. And it's also difficult because how do you know what positive or negative changes will result from your actions? Again, we learn best from our mistakes if we choose to, and how we move forward. So number 5 is diminish harm and develop opportunities. And what do we mean by that? Well, it's offering that welcoming environment, respect and inclusion, to listen more with empathy, to really listen to people and be sensitive, and then take inclusive action with that to diminish that harm. Again, by listening more, we can really learn and understand the community needs better. We open ourselves to them and what people have to say. And a reflection, how do you center community needs on the Urban Forestry Commission? What structures need to be changed to be more inclusive? You've mentioned some of those, which is great. If anyone wants to add something to that, please do, to help diminish harm and develop opportunities. Please do. Because when we center people most impacted, everyone benefits. We all really benefit. I don't know if anybody's added anything. No, okay. Great.
I like to jump in. I think there's
please.
kind of a big elephant in the room here, but looking at the last phrase here, what barriers may you encounter? We've talked about this for years, but the current city policy that says that people, if they want a street tree or if there are a street tree, that the people who whose house or property fronts that street tree are responsible for paying all the maintenance for the entire life of the tree. And that's one of the big barriers for people to get street trees by their houses, which will help mitigate climate change, have equitable health benefits. But I think until that's changed, that's like the big one.
Thank you for naming that, Daniel.
Yes,
Appreciate
yes,
that.
definitely. That's like an ordinance change, right? Yeah, which is huge. And Jeanette also put something in here about have meetings at hours working families can participate. Absolutely, 100%. That is so important. And then sometimes folks I know are offering childcare at the same time to make that more accessible for people to actually participate. And I know that Kathy, can you take us to number 6?
Thank you. And I just got a time check. I think we have until 55 to wrap this up. So thanks for giving us extra time as we started late. So step 6, evaluate and be accountable. This is so crucial and important to all of this work. We don't want talk without action and change. And so to make sure that what we're doing is making an impact in a positive way and lifting up voices of those most impacted, we need to be accountable to ourselves, to each other, to our agencies we work for, and measure the results. If we don't know if we're making changes in an equitable way, you know, what is all of this is for naught. So making sure that we're tracking these outcomes and constantly trying to do better. It is a journey. There's no end point to this work, but we need to do things differently. And we know that we need to right these past wrongs, as Carolyn mentioned earlier. Part of this step is really about follow-up. Following up and having that really be part of your plan, your outreach plan, your planning process, part of your project workflow. That follow-up with each other, to ask critical questions with community, to get testimonies on how the policies are serving or not serving the people they're trying to. That follow-up is really important in building trust and relationships and being able to identify what work needs to still be done and to just kind of serve as, you know, a light to guide you in this work. So think about, you know, how you follow up in your work in the Urban Forestry Commission. How can you integrate what you learn into the process? How can you really always be of this learning mindset and to just bring that back? And then also about tracking incomes. This came up in the chat as well. It's really important to track if anyone is better off by these efforts. It's much easier to track inputs, things we do like quantities, the number of workshops, the number of trees we plant, the number of new species added to the tree list. It's much harder to track if anyone is better off by a result of change that we're trying to do with these policies. And so that's really that qualitative in partnership with community and measuring that our success is really community success.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. So finally, step 7 is communicate, which to me, as a recovering broadcast journalist from a career ago, communication is so key to everything we do, right? And it has to be threaded throughout all 7 steps. It's always important, but amid COVID, even more so. It helps with understanding and, as we said earlier, building trust, and explains why we do what we do. And it's all about building engagement and relationship building, which is so key to this work with the racial equity lens. And as I said before, continue this to the continuous care and nurturing of our tree canopy. And again, it sounds easy, but it isn't, because we forget, we get so wrapped up in what we're doing on our day-to-day work. And that lack of communication and follow-up creates harm and will really work against us. So in order to really be fully into the racial equity plans, 7 steps, and you add your own steps depending on you're working on the commission or wherever else. And I know we're a bit over. We want to thank you and really wish we had a little bit more back and forth, but we're going to have some resources that we're going to send to you. And Kathy's going to put those in the chat. And Brian and Jen, get a hold of us if you have questions, comments, thoughts.
And we have about 2 minutes. Brian extended our time just to be generous because we started late. So I'm going to put the actual 4-page tool into the chat. But if y'all just want to leave us with some chats of, what spoke to you, this whirlwind of 30 minutes of overview of racial equity lens, how would you use this racial equity lens? Maybe it's one question, maybe it's all the questions in your work, in your position on the UFC. We would love to just see those in the chat as we have to roll off. And I see Jen's hand up.
I just wanted to say that in regards to time, what we've worked out is for Kenya and or Carolyn, Kathy, folks from the equity inclusion team to come back at a future meeting to work with the commission about training, like how to apply it. This was the overview. So there'll be more time for this.
Thanks for that, Jen.
And I see a question about having access to the presentation. We can check on that. And I just put the 4-page tool in the chat, which is on our website. It's open for everyone to see. We have it in Spanish and English. And so all of the questions are on one page. I like to just have it handy. So all of the slides that we did go over with the questions are in the chat, and we can send the PDF to Brian if anyone needs that.
Thanks for that question, Lorena.
Carolyn, Kathy, thank you so much for this presentation. I think it's a conversation we are deep into. I know I'm personally doing a ton of this work myself, and I will just, for future presentations, I might just add a quick comment since I have the mic. It would be really helpful to be a little bit more explicit about how power sharing is happening as a result of this equity lens. At the core of a lot of this work is the ability for large institutions, predominantly white managed institutions like cities around the country, to be able to bring more of the resources to community members, because as a few of our commissioners have noted already, that knowledge about what's needed is already present in the community. And so what can the city do? What can parks do, Parks and Rec do? What can urban forestry do to lift up what community members have already identified and already know is at the core of many of these issues? So that's something I would really like to see in this work that Parks is doing, and certainly what urban forestry is doing, about how to bring that, allow more power to be given into the community rather than taking and kind of administering that power by referring to folks like underserved. They can serve themselves. It's about how the city enables that service to happen. So I'd really like to just underscore that as the conversation kind of unfolds in the coming years.
Thank you so much for that. We will bring that back and share it with our team.
That's part of that ground up we're talking about, right? It's not top down. It's more inclusive. Absolutely. Oh, Barbara has her hand up.
Yeah, my chat isn't working. So, but I just wanted to say that as we move forward and all of that, maybe you can help us, because I think that a lot of the BIPOC community are renters. They don't make the decision about whether trees would be added to property, like, with help from Friends of Trees or whatever. And, maybe they'd like trees, but it's not their decision because they don't own the property. So, that's another place where maybe communication and learning about the values and benefits of trees possibly would help those property owners see that as good for their property values, good for their, increasing their ability to rent out a property, et cetera.
Thanks for that, Barbara.
And these are exactly those deeper scenarios that you could workshop through together with the lens. So Thank you so much. Thank you all for your engagement and yeah, just being so present with us today. We appreciate that. Thanks for all your work on this commission.
Yes, thanks for thank you so much for your service.
Yeah.
All of you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Kathy. Sorry we were a little off with our timing, but really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. We'll be in touch.
Thanks for your engagement.
All right. And without further ado, Claudio, thank you so much for your patience. I'm having a lot of trouble today with keeping time, as you probably well noticed. I'd like to turn the floor over to you as soon as I can. I just want to this is for the commissioners. This is about the urban forestry's operations levy budget request that Claudio Campuzano, who's the Portland Parks and Rec's finance and property technology manager, and Brian are going to present about what's happening with urban forestry and some of the levy discussions that you've all heard about, and the Sustainable Future program that kind of kicked all this off. So Claudio, if there's any specific feedback, or Brian, even if there's any specific feedback you're looking for from the commission, please let us know. But otherwise, I'll just turn it over to you without, unless there are any other pieces that I'm missing at this point.
That sounds good. I'm happy to get started, and I think we'll talk a little bit about how the commission can give feedback to the commissioner, the director, and our urban forester, Jen Cairo, as per code. So great. So let's see. So as Vivek mentioned, my name is Claudio Campuzano. I'm the finance, property, and technology manager for the Bureau. I prefer he, him pronouns. So thanks so much for having me here to talk about Portland Parks and Recreation's fall budget monitoring process submission and how it's going to impact funding for urban forestry for the current 21-22 fiscal year and going forward. So Brian, do you think you could bring up the slides for me? And my apologies, I don't have a splashy, intro slide. I thought I might be incorporated into a larger deck, but so I'll start with this quick reminder that we're working within the context of the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland framework, which I think you have been briefed on in the past, and today you've selected some representatives. I'm sorry, I was late to the meeting, so I think that happened earlier in the session for some of the two of those important work teams. So now I'm seeing shaking from Jen. I don't know if that was a discussion about the work team selection, but so two of the work teams that have been critical as part of the budget process, specifically in proposal development, are the listening and learning work team and the decision support tool team. And I'll talk particularly a little bit more about that decision support tool as we go on. So Brian, if you want to just advance the slide, thanks. So let's start with a quick review of where we've been and where we're going. As you recall, less than a year ago, feels like a long time ago, it's still less than a year ago. In November, Portland voters approved a 5-year local option levy that's going to generate about $45 to $48 million a year. So soon after its passage, Parks quickly came to council in February with a round of initial investments to ramp up the organizational infrastructure and to support growth, but also to ensure that we could deliver on our promised summer 2021 programming. And many of those changes are reflected in this year's adopted budget as ongoing costs. So, and that adopted budget was passed in June. Our fiscal year, as a reminder, goes from July 1 through June 30th. So, but after we developed that budget, we quickly shifted our focus in May to this next round of investments that we're going to talk about today. And then in June, the director, after meeting one-on-one with division managers to discuss priorities, and she issued her guidance for the fall at the beginning of June. And from there, the team worked all through the summer to develop proposals that met that guidance and particularly the intent of the voters and the ballot language. So now we're getting feedback from our stakeholders, Urban Forestry Commission, among others, to see if we're getting it right based on the listing that we've been doing over the last months and years. So this culminates with our submission to City Council on September 9. And they're going to review the requests over the following month with the support of City Budget Office, who's going to review our asks and have a work session on October 19th. And I'll note that this is part of a larger citywide fall budget monitoring process. but will certainly feature in a pretty big way, just because the fall bump is typically a more technical supplemental budget, and this is most definitely not technical in nature. So ultimately, the Win City will get City Council approval at the end of October, and then the real work of implementation begins. So I just wanted to point out that the Urban Forestry Commission, as you know, advises the city forester, the parks director, and the commissioner in charge on budget. So to that end, I think Brian is going to help you all provide your feedback. If you do provide formal feedback in the form of a letter, it would be most appropriate to send it to the commissioner, and I think CC the director and Jen as the forester. And that's, to me, that's how code reads, and I would encourage you to do it that way. And as far as timing, the most useful points are before the submittal, so before September 9, and also before the work session. By the time we get to the work session, we're starting to incorporate any additional council changes, and they usually file the final ordinance shortly after the work session. So those are kind of the most valuable points to provide feedback. So next slide. So I mentioned that the director issued guidance back in June. I just want to review that briefly with, and highlight the focus was on aligning with levy priorities. So these are our promises to voters. And I'll show in a few slides how our decision making to this point has kind of fallen out with those, how it aligns with those priorities. So because of our focus on financial sustainability, of course, we want to make sure that all of these investments are accommodated in that 5-year forecast for the levy. And then as this is very relevant to the last conversation you were just having, as we make that very intentional shift to being an anti-racist organization, our director wanted to make sure that we operationalize racial equity in our decision making. And I'll speak to that in a few moments as well. So finally, she wanted us to be responsive to what we've been hearing from staff, particularly BIPOC staff, through our employee survey. And so those were the 4 key priorities that she highlighted in her guidance. So next slide. So I mentioned the work teams earlier, and specifically that decision support tool team. The team worked on an accelerated timeline this summer to build a pilot tool to help us with our decision-making during this process. And a key feature was using the newly developed racial equity lens, the equity lens and empowerment tool that you just heard about. I didn't know that was on the agenda, actually. It's such perfect timing, so you get a lot of background on what that is. And so that tool was used for all of our proposals, and those components were then scored by a team, including our equity manager and a handful of trained staff who've got deep DEI backgrounds. And so, we wanted to, while the tool itself generates a lot of really valuable narrative content, being able to summarize that and combine it and sort of be able to summarize it for decision making and sort of open up the opportunities to sort of dig into that narrative by looking at sort of that summary information. That was really important. We also combined that with scores we used a geographic overlay using census data to measure how those investments were, each individual investment would impact youth, people of color, and people experiencing poverty. Those scores were then available for sorting and filtering during all the decision-making sessions in summarized form. But most importantly, that allowed the director to ask good questions and press in with any questions she had, specifically with an equity focus. So you can see a snapshot of the dashboard that we were working from here. But it was really for something that came together really rapidly. It was a really valuable tool for us in decision making. So if you want to move on to the next slide. So where did that take us? Well, first, let's take a look at where we landed with the proposal so far from an organizational perspective. As you can see, we're currently planning on allocating $14 million in ongoing resources across all divisions. Right now, Urban Forestry is looking at $3.8 million ongoing increase. While it's the second largest allocation among the various divisions, it is by far the biggest increase in the expenditure of tax resources when you compare it to the base budget. For comparison, urban forestry has an ongoing general fund allocation of 3.6 million. So it's more than a 100% increase on that tax allocation. So that's really just to give you an overall view. But if we move on to the next slide, while those organizational allocations are useful, we really view things through an outcomes lens, and what increased levels of service do Portlanders get from us. So here we see the full set of allocations through that lens of those levy commitments that we talked about. Now, this may look a little bit complicated, so I'm going to try and simplify it. Staff were asked, as they were developing proposals, to select relevant parks levy commitments related to the activities and the positions in those proposals. There were 15 commitments listed, and those are taken directly from statements in the voters pamphlet, and staff were instructed to select a primary commitment for the proposal as well as any secondary commitments. This pie chart shows a breakdown of the total amount requested under each parks levy commitment. Now, when we've talked about the levy, we've generally focused on three main priorities: recreation for all, community partnerships, and protect and grow nature. Now, some of those commitments apply to multiple priorities. For example, provide park and recreation services to diverse populations, including communities of color, seniors, teens, households experiencing poverty, immigrants and refugees, and people living with disabilities. In the light blue at the top is central to all aspects of our work. Therefore, it intersects with all three groups. That's also why the rings around the pie chart add up to more than 100%. Taking each ring on its own, we can say that 40% of the proposed budget has applications for recreation to all. 32% will support elements of community partnerships, and 79% will contribute in some way to protecting and growing nature. So all that said, you can see the big yellow and the big bright orange slices represent outcomes directly related to our urban forest. And I'll also note that the biggest part of that big umber orange, more sort of umbery color in the middle, let me make sure that they are in fact the colors that I saw them as that's related to the implementation of a new asset management system. The biggest component of that is that new asset management system, and certainly a component of that will be the tree management system. So those three slices I want to draw your attention to. So that's really things at a high level. I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but otherwise I'd turn it over to Jen to talk about the specifics of urban forestry outcomes that we hope to yield out of these investments.
Great, thank you, Claudio. Brian, if you could share the other PowerPoint, I'll get going on it. There we go. Move right. We do have a pretty first slide, but we can move to the next one. Okay, so as Claudio said, the point of the process that we're at, as decisions have been made within the Parks Bureau about what goes forward in the process, including getting your input and other stakeholders. And so right here on this slide is a brief summary of the areas that urban forestry's budget requests reside in, what services we're looking to improve and expand with the funding. Those are park tree care and emergency response, tree planting expansion, Title 11 tree code improvements, or implementation improvements, and also engagement, community engagement, partnerships, science, and policy components. So we can go to the next slide. Now I'll go into each one of those areas a little more so you can understand what they are. I should mention this too. When it comes to individual budget packages, those are different than these four categories. We've grouped them together just to make it easier to understand and communicate about. So here we are with park tree care and emergency response. So this first service outcome is a significant increase in park tree maintenance. Currently, a little less than 50% of our arborist team's labor hours are spent on routine park tree maintenance work, and the remainder of that time is spent on tree emergency response and interagency services. The impact of this is a significant backlog of overdue work in parks on trees. So this levy package will enable us to place our 154 developed parks on a 10-year proactive maintenance cycle. The capacity being added will also increase the safety and reliability of our emergency response. As you know, urban forestry responds to tree emergencies in public rights of way and on public properties 24/7. And we've seen some incredibly challenging and dangerous storms over the last few years that have highlighted the need for more capacity and stability in that capacity. Going to the next one, Brian. Tree planting expansion. Currently, we're in the process of hiring a tree planting program supervisor, which we've never been able to have before, and a GIS technician. Those are both funded in the ramp up stage of the levy. This package would further Parks' commitment to planting where trees are needed most, with a priority on large form, evergreen, native, and climate resilient trees. And those are parts of the city's urban forest management plan to prioritize, as well as best management practices for forest services. Specifically, this package adds staff to the planting program, which will provide the capacity to plant at least 3,200 trees per year, beginning in 22-23 planting season that winter. And the planting will follow the guidance provided in growing a more equitable urban forest, the planting strategy. Also included in those positions is a dedicated community engagement staff member. The position will respond to the guidance Parks and BES received in the stakeholder engagement process that Vivek chaired last year. And this position will support tree planting by working with BIPOC communities and organizations on education and stewardship partnerships. Having this team in place will enable increased utilization of the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund, as well as potential new sources of tree planting support if they become available. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to the third package area, regulatory improvement. This package adds staff, vehicles, and office space, of course, that staff need to meet Parks and Recreation's Title 11 trees regulatory and permitting responsibilities. Parks is the city's sole implementer of most of the tree code requirements, and these tree code requirements apply to all private properties, public rights of way, and city-owned and managed properties in Portland, including parks. Paired with previous approved ramp-up positions, this package provides a span of control, technical and administrative staff, and frontline staff to improve permitting efficiency and speed, customer service, interbureau coordination in regards to regulations, and forest infrastructure management. As some of you might remember, when Title 11 was implemented, urban forestry wasn't allocated sufficient resources to implement the code, and this package really closes that gap. It also includes staff to begin designing a code compliance program, which I believe Damon mentioned earlier in the meeting. You've likely heard us discuss often that we estimate about 2,000 trees required by permits aren't getting planted each year. Our timeline is to hire a lead for this program in this package to design the program and then request whatever amount of additional staff would be needed in the future years. Next slide. Okay, and that final grouping is engagement, science, and policy. And this package increases the foundational capacity in the city's community forest stewardship, science, and policy work areas. Urban forestry provides community education and engagement programs to make Portlanders aware of city tree regulations and to help them connect with and correctly care for the urban forest, most of which is on privately owned properties. The team also measures, evaluates, and monitors Portland's urban forest and creates and updates Portland's forest management policies and standards. This package makes it possible to strengthen partnerships and improve and expand offerings, including with BIPOC residents and communities. It also improves capacity and reduces delays in collecting forest data, performing assessments, and creating and updating standards, which are central to management and regulation of the city's forest infrastructure. And lastly, the package includes staff to lead the update of Portland's urban forest management plan, Title 11 amendments, engagement in citywide planning processes, and updating specifications such as the street tree planting standards. And finally, next steps. As Claudio covered, we're still in the internal stage of this process. These packages will need to receive support from Commissioner Rubio and be approved by City Council this fall. This is a significant increase of staff, vehicles, equipment, et cetera, not only for urban forestry, but the entire Bureau. And the year 2022 will be dedicated largely to hiring and implementation. In future budget cycles for the operations levy, we'll be requesting additional funding for one-time funding for the urban forest management plan update, staffing for the code compliance program that we're aspiring to build in the interim, as well as other one-time funding needs that may arise. And that concludes that presentation.
Okay. Commissioners, do you want to open it up for questions, comment period? To, I think, for Claudio, who's still here, and Jen. I see Megan.
I just had a brief question before jumping elsewhere from either Jen or Claudio. One thing I think that might be helpful is also knowing that the levy funds can only go to cover certain things. So as we think about what the packages are, I think one thing that's helpful is to think about what it can't be, because we may have some wishes that weren't included. So I didn't know if that could just be commented on, because we might be like street tree maintenance, which unfortunately we know. So
yeah,
I'll jump in real quick on that. So the big one that we can't fund is capital. It was specifically not a capital levy. Besides that, I actually, if you look at that slide with the and hopefully Brian can forward you the PDF, the full deck, and I can bring it back up. But it's really those levy commitments. So they're pretty broadly written, and they reflect a lot of the work of the Bureau. And so there's not a lot that's off the table in terms of direct service. So we did write that very particularly. I mean, the levy at $45 to $48 million a year, just to give you an order of magnitude, we receive a little over $70 million of general fund every year. So this is a very significant increase. And so to really limit it around specific services rather than allowing us to really enhance a lot of the core functions of the Bureau and fill gaps where we know we have them. That was really the focus. So Jen, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, thanks, Claudio. And thanks for the question, Megan. I think you're right. It's kind of background information that's really important. I'm going to speak specifically to street trees because Megan brought that up. And as you'll all recall, the levy was the result of voting, ballot measure that was that Porter's approved by a healthy margin. And prior to putting that ballot measure out, as is often the case, there was a lot of discussion and polling that happened to find out what folks really thought they would be interested in paying for. And one of the things we made sure to include was the city assuming financial responsibility for street tree maintenance in that initial polling. And it did not do well. It actually had a positive response rate in the 30s, as I recall. And so that's not something that we responsibly could use the operations levy to support. But fear not, it does not mean it goes away. The larger project, Sustainable Future, is where we'll now focus on trying to get that policy change and funding met. Does that help, Megan? Damon?
Hey, Damon.
Oh, okay, Vic, you got it.
Right. Just something I just heard Claudio say is that we can't use this for capital expenditures. Are trees still not viewed as capital?
It's a good question. My understanding is that they can actually be treated as capital, but they are not necessarily capital expenditures. So we don't have them in our capital asset inventory they're not reflected in the city's comprehensive annual financial report as on our balance sheet. So so they're not considered capital from an accounting perspective.
Interesting. Well, I guess in this case, that's not a bad thing, but in other cases, that's a really horrible thing.
I'll add to what Claudio said, Damon. That's something we've been working a lot on. Actually, the nation is working on this. Other cities' forestry programs are too. Certain types of tree planting now, because of that work, can be considered capital projects. It's the maintenance that comes afterwards that's still the primary issue. And ultimately, like Claudio said, it's not considered capital on the city's balance sheets.
Yeah, and I'll also note the distinction between capital from a balance sheet perspective and capitalizable. You can actually finance. So when we talk about capital projects, we've even been working towards looking into whether tree establishment can be included within project costs, so that we can use capital resources when we do get them to fund those establishment costs. So there's a lot of nuance around the issue, but I recognize you guys been tracking this for a bit, so but it is that we're trying to be as creative as we can.
Okay, Greg. Greg, can you?
Yep, still operating on the phone. I am really pleased to see the design compliance component of this. I just think it's been so tragic. And I guess I wonder with the program, there's actually two things I wanted to say. One, regarding the design compliance, is there any possibility of this actually acting retroactively, sort of the years lost? And the second question is actually regarding the dedicated planning and policy staff. And will that be housed in urban forestry? Or I think sometimes there's been a disconnect from the planning staff. And I just feel that because I was actually part of that team. And every once in a while they get called in to do something like an urban forestry management plan, but then it's done and it goes away. And when I was trail planner, I mean, I just kind of could keep my finger in any kind of trail thing. So I'm kind of curious about where those kinds of staff will be housed, because when you go through, and I was talking to Jen recently on another matter, and Parks 2020 was pretty weak on urban forestry issues. And I think it was because it really lacked a staff person in that planning and design section. So two questions, sort of different.
Yeah, on the first one, Greg, that is something that we'll look at as we have the ramp up position, or I'm sorry, this position, to start looking at what a code compliance program would look like. So we don't know the answer yet, but we'll look at that. On the second, that position, the forest policy and planning lead position, will be in urban forestry, however, working closely with parks planning as well as the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and other bureaus when it comes to policies.
Any more response on that? Move to Daniel and then Bruce.
I think Bruce had his hand up first, so
okay, got it.
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Thanks, Daniel.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Claudio, I could not, because of my eyes and the small computer screen, a lot of the text I was totally unable to see. I would like to be able to look carefully at the information you presented, but it was not visible to me. That's one thing. I appreciate a 10-year maintenance plan for the park's trees. I think that's a great idea. It's a 5-year levy. 5 years out, you may have your 10-year plan, but if you don't have the additional staff, I'm sure you're thinking about that, but I appreciate the start and the commitment to having some sort of more ongoing basis. But it touches on my other thing. I was glad to hear that a number of the levy funds that urban forestry plans on spending are for kind of one-time projects, because there's nothing worse than ramping up and then the levy funds disappear, the taxpayers don't support it, and you're laying off people, or you're having to discontinue programs or services that you previously had. So I assume that's been certainly in your thoughts, trying to be very judicious. But I can remember the Friends of Trees experience a number of years ago when they had to seriously cut back on their staff because funds disappeared. So I hope that I assume that's in your thoughts, but I hope it is.
Any response?
I'll
Yes,
try to make,
Bruce. Yes, Bruce.
Vivek, I'll try to make mine real short.
Okay, thanks.
Question for Claudio, and I guess probably Jen too. I'm wondering if how much you are going to be able to spend legally under the levy measure on for tree planting on the activities that are separate from just tree planting itself. So things like watering and pruning. And the reason I ask is because I'm kind of thinking about this metric about we're going to get at least 3,200 trees in the ground, plant them each year, and thinking I would kind of reframe that in terms of not how many get in the ground and are planted, but how many trees survive into maturity so that we can provide the benefits that the mature trees get. Because I think that's really what we're after. And so I'm thinking if some of these funds could actually be used to do things like watering or pruning for trees that actually are already in the ground now, but are really young and could really use a little extra TLC to make sure they survive into maturity, that those kinds of expenses would be really great. I think those of us who are in the tree planting business in some way are seeing that, with climate change, the conditions are getting even more and more harsh for trees to survive into that maturity phase. So just wondering what flexibility is on some of those other activities, especially trees that are already in the ground.
Yeah. Yes, Daniel, it's really about the outcome. So what survives, and as you all should know, because we've presented a few times, we have a really robust monitoring program that follows Forest Service protocols for all the planting we do. And when we talk about funds for planting, it includes 3 years of establishment care, so watering, pruning, and those sorts of things. When it comes to park trees, the package around park tree maintenance includes everything thereafter for park trees. When it comes to street trees, that's going back to the question that Megan had. That's about that policy, the code policy the city has, that it's the adjacent property owner's responsibility. So we will have opportunities like through our education and community tree stewardship programs to provide that type of work with these funds, pruning, for example, volunteers pruning street trees. And moss, that's something that this is not designed to fund, and is something we're going to continue to pursue in sustainable future.
All right, thank you for that response. In the last negative minute that we have, can we? I just want to thank Claudio. We're done with our. We're at time, so I want to essentially thank you for your. For representing this work and for giving us a little heads up on where the levy is. I know a lot of us have been curious about that. Thank you for that. And I want to just leave a minute here, or a negative minute here, for Jen to bring up representatives for the Healthy Parks, Healthy People program.
Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland, but very close. It's people. We know it's about people. Yeah. So again, we've talked about this a couple of times. There's requests for a member for each of 2 teams, mission, vision, and I can't remember the rest of that one, quite honestly, off the top of my head. The other one is the action team. And Adrian had expressed interest if no one else was interested. She's not here today. And we didn't hear from other folks. So Vivek and Brian and I discussed, and I reached out to Greg about mission, vision, that group, and Greg said she would be willing as kind of a backup to see if others are interested. And I reached out to Ann Jeanette about the action group, and Ann Jeanette is interested in that. And then I know I had a different conversation that Damon asked some questions, so maybe he's interested too. So to make it short, Greg and Anjanette are possibilities. Greg backup, Anjanette said she would be interested. It would be great if you could identify your two members in our final seconds.
And I just reiterate there, you did say this was a pilot program to remunerate participants in this as well. So there will be resources provided to those who participate in this.
That's right. Thank you. I forgot to mention that again, but yes. And we anticipate it's an opt-out, so folks don't have to take it, but it'll be available if they'd like to. Great point.
Jen, for those people you mentioned who are considering this, do you know, are these meetings going to be held during the workday, during the evenings, before work? Has that been established?
It has not. What we do know is that the groups will run September through January, give or take, and they're expecting to meet 5 times for up to 2 hours each time during that time period. I imagine scheduling will be collaborative. When are people available?
Can we potentially just quickly, the folks that are being named, I want to vote if you feel interested. I'm already on the budget advisory committee, so I kind of feel like my voice gets heard, which is why I'm not putting my name forward. So it sounds like Anjanette's interested for the one. It sounds like the other, we maybe have a couple of choices. So any of those people want to raise their hand?
Thank you, Megan.
I won't stand in your way, Greg.
Unmute. Yeah, I didn't feel I was particularly skilled for the particular option. But basically I understood that if no one else did it, someone would have to do it. So consider me like the last candidate. So it seems to me like there's at least 1 or 2 other that are more likely.
I don't want to take too much time on this awkward silence here of who's going to participate, but do want to recognize that we have some folks who have expressed interest in action teams and in mission, vision, etc. So part of what I think I might work with Jen and Brian to come back to commissioners about are if we can get folks like committed to this. It sounds like it's about a 10-hour commitment. Sounds like there's an opportunity to really move some to bring in a lot of this equity lens discussion we just had, combined with a lot of the levy discussions we just had in advancing this Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland project.
So since Anjanette's the only person who's expressed an interest in the action team, I would suggest the UFC right now approve Anjanette for that. And thank you very much for taking that on.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. That's a great. Do we need to vote on this or can we just do a thumbs up? I mean, in a sense, we're voting, but is this an official vote?
Yeah, it'd be good if it were official. They'd carry the weight of the commission in their role.
Good. And so we have one person that we're voting in. Anybody else? Okay.
So that Greg is the backup, so is willing, and they will start the groups hypothetically before the next commission meeting.
Okay.
So am I understanding that Adrian is interested in the other group, not the action group? Is that?
Adrian offered as a backup as well because she's already participating as the Parks Board.
And appeals.
If we have people interested in all 3, let's vote on it now.
Yeah.
Just 2, right?
Okay, so the 2 we're voting on essentially our action team with Anjanette and Greg as backup, and then Adrian as the second. Is that what I'm hearing? I would want to hear a motion before we vote, though.
Let me clarify a little bit, Vivek, and Greg and Anjanette, if I get this wrong, let us know. But I think it was Anjanette for the action team and Greg for mission, vision, values team.
Thank you. Yes. So need a motion for that. All right.
I would make, do you have a motion?
Not yet.
Do it.
Go, Barbara.
Do it.
I would make a motion that we have a vote on a representative for the action team. And I understand that Anjanette is willing to do that. And the backup would be, say again?
There is no backup.
Okay. And then for the other one that Adrian would be the candidate. And I make a motion, we vote on that.
Second,
Or did somebody say that Adrian only wanted to be a backup? I'm confused now.
No, as I understand it, we're voting for Anjanette on the action team and for Greg on the mission and values team.
Okay,
right.
thank,
So I motion I so moved.
Okay, all in favor? Virtual hand or physical hand? I can see almost, yeah, I can see all of you. Great.
I'll second it first, though.
And
Yeah.
yeah, we have second. I thought Barbara motioned. Daniel, I heard yours as a second.
Amendment.
I actually amended the motion.
Okay, so let's do this again. Let's do
Second.
this again. Just I don't know how official this needs to be, but it's good practice for us. We're out of practice clearly, or I'm out of practice actually clearly. Motion. I heard a motion amended motion from Daniel for Anjanette Action Team and Greg for the Mission Vision Team. Okay, and all in favor. Second for that.
Second.
I said
Motion?
thanks.
Wait, Barbara, we have an amendment. Damon seconds, and all in favor, virtual or physical hand up. Okay.
let's go.
Any opposed? None. Okay, so moved. Thank you, Anjanette. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate
Thank you.
your additional service. This is good.
Well done.
Yeah, thanks all. I'm sorry kept you a little long today. It was a little clumsy on my end. I'll try to refine this for next time, get us moving a little more swimmingly through the discussion. Thanks again. We'll see you in a month, if not sooner. Take care and hope you get outside a little bit.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Till
Meeting
soon.
adjourned.